The courthouse stood quiet at dawn, a brick monument in the center of a sleepy town that rarely made the news. But today, the silence was replaced by the hum of media vans, the flashing of cameras, and the steady shuffle of curious onlookers pushing their way through courthouse doors. It was a Thursday morning in April, and yet the atmosphere felt more like the premiere of a blockbuster film. Except there was no script, only real people, real stakes, and a truth that no one had fully uncovered yet. Inside, Courtroom 3 buzzed. With restless energy, journalists scribbled in notepads and whispered into phones. Every bench was packed. Local business owners, teachers, off-duty cops, even teenagers skipping school. They weren't here out of civic duty. They were here for the trial, the state versus Marcus Lane, a case already being called the strangest crime of the year. Marcus Lane, a 28-year-old mechanic from Eastbrook, was on trial for allegedly breaking into the home of Diane Mercer, a retired school administrator. The charge: armed home invasion with intent to assault. According to police, Marcus shattered a window, entered her home in the middle of the night, and was subdued in the backyard by a highly trained canine named Shadow, a German Shepherd known in the precinct for being both fierce and flawless. The arrest, as described by Officer Jason Hall, seemed clean. Hall claimed that Shadow tracked Marcus's scent across several yards and tackled him just as he tried to escape through a side gate. The prosecution's evidence included glass shards from the broken window, torn fabric caught on a fence, and scratches on Marcus's arms that allegedly matched Shadow's bite pattern. On paper, the story was airtight. But something didn't add up. The defense team, led by veteran attorney Claire Monroe, had already begun planting seeds of doubt during pretrial hearings. She hinted at inconsistencies in the timeline, missing surveillance footage from a nearby street, and conflicting statements from Officer Hall. But she was careful not to push too hard too early. She had something, or rather, someone waiting for the right moment. Still, most in the room assumed this would be an open and shut case. After all, who argues with the word of a decorated police officer and a dog with 6 confirmed felony takedowns? Marcus sat at the defense table, wearing a cheap suit and a tired expression. He looked nothing like a criminal mastermind. He was quiet, lean, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He hadn't said much since his arrest, except to maintain his innocence. "I didn't break into that house," he had told the arresting officers. "You've got the wrong guy." The prosecution opened with confidence. Assistant District Attorney Lynn Porter painted Marcus as a man with a grudge, someone who knew the homeowner personally and sought revenge over a dispute no one would talk about on record. There was motive. There was access. There was physical evidence, she declared. And most importantly, there was a witness, our K-9 officer, Shadow, who apprehended Mr. Lane on the scene. The audience nodded along. The pieces seemed to fit. Even Claire Monroe, sitting beside her client, kept a neutral expression, as if waiting for a storm, only she could see on the radar. Then came a brief recess. And that's when word began to spread quietly at first, and louder with each retelling. "A little girl's gonna testify. 3 years old. Did you hear that? What could she even know? They're letting a toddler take the stand?" It sounded ridiculous, unprecedented, irresponsible even. But it was true. Claire Monroe had submitted a request the day before for a special child witness accommodation under the state's exception clause for unusual and compelling circumstances. It had been approved quietly, without cameras, and with a lot of side-eye from the prosecution. By the time the court resumed, everyone was on edge. The bailiff opened the door, and in walked a woman holding the hand of a tiny girl. She couldn't have been taller than 3 feet. Her hair was in uneven pigtails. She wore pink sneakers and clutched a floppy, overloved bunny rabbit by the ear. Her name was Lily Daniels, and no one had expected her to matter. She was gently lifted into a booster seat beside the judge's bench, away from the usual witness stand. Claire Monroe knelt beside her, speaking in a soft voice, asking her if she was okay. Lily nodded shyly. "Do you know why you're here today?" Claire asked. "To talk about the dog," Lily replied without hesitation. A ripple moved through the courtroom. The judge adjusted his glasses. The jury leaned in just slightly. "Tell us about the dog," Claire continued. Lily pointed to a picture being displayed on a monitor. Shadow, the police dog. Her eyes widened. "That's the doggy," she said, voice a bit louder now. "I know him," Claire nodded. "How do you know him, sweetheart?" Lily tilted her head. "He comes to Uncle Jay's house." And just like that, the room went still. Uncle Jay. Claire's next question was precise. "Do you know what Uncle Jay looks like?" "Is he here in the courtroom today?" Lily looked around. Her finger rose slowly. "That's him," she said. "Right. There." Every net turned dot. She was pointing at Officer Jason Hall. The room erupted. The judge pounded his gavel. Lawyers stood up. Reporters fumbled for pens and phones. Officer Hall turned pale. He shook his head almost imperceptibly, but it was too late. The words had been spoken, and the truth, or at least a crack in the polished glass of the case, had been exposed. This wasn't just a child rambling. It was a toddler directly connecting the police dog, not to the scene of the crime, but to someone entirely different. Someone with the power to manipulate that dog. Someone with motive. The judge called for an immediate recess. But the court of public opinion was already roaring outside those doors. No one knew it yet, but Lily Daniels had just changed the direction of the trial, and maybe the fate of more than one man in that courtroom. The courtroom remained in stunned silence long after the judge struck his gavel. Officer Jason Hall, up until now, the prosecution's strongest witness, sat frozen, his face pale, lips pressed together. He didn't say a word, didn't look at anyone. The only thing that moved was the subtle twitch of his jaw as he stared across the room at the tiny girl who had just pointed him out. Lily Daniels, 3 years old, quiet, innocent, too young, many had assumed, to say anything that could hold weight in court. But her words had struck like lightning. "That's him. That's Uncle Jay." The judge had ordered a 10-minute recess, but the murmurs in the room carried on like waves crashing in a storm. Jurors glanced at each other. Reporters sprinted to the hallway, sending frantic texts and voice notes. The public gallery buzzed with whispers. Inside the defense room just off the courtroom, Claire Monroe stood with her arms folded tightly, staring at her young witness. Lily sat on her mother's lap, humming to herself while brushing her stuffed bunny's ears, oblivious perhaps to the legal earthquake she had just triggered. "She doesn't understand what she just did," Claire murmured to the child's mother. "I know," the mother said quietly, "but she remembers everything. Her pediatrician says she has that kind of memory eidetic, or something like that." Claire nodded. That memory had just become their secret weapon. Back in the courtroom, the recess ended. Everyone took their seats. Officer Hall hadn't moved far. His attorney now sat beside him, whispering urgently, eyes wide with concern. The judge addressed the room. "We will proceed with the special witness testimony. I remind everyone that Miss Daniels is a minor and will be questioned under approved guidelines. Any disruptions will result in removal." Claire returned to her place beside the bench, where Lily now sat comfortably, legs dangling, bunny in lap. A child-sized headset was adjusted over her ears, and a microphone was clipped, too. Her little cardigan. She looked more like she was ready for story time than courtroom questioning. Claire smiled gently. "Lily," she began, her voice warm and slow, "can you tell us a little more about the dog you saw earlier?" Lily's eyes lit up. He's nice, she said cheerfully. He licks my hand when I feed him hot dogs. Do you remember his name? Shadow, she said instantly. He sleeps under the table. There it was again, details. Consistent. Confident. Claire leaned in. And who gives Shadow hot dogs? Uncle Jay, Lily replied. He tells me not to tell Mommy. Gasps were barely stifled. Claire nodded carefully, pacing her tone. And where do you see Uncle Jay and Shadow? At the White House with the red chair outside. It has squeaky steps. He lets me play in the yard. Now? Even the jury was leaning forward. Claire picked up a photo. It was an exterior shot of Officer Hall's off-duty residence. White siding, a red-painted rocking chair on the porch, and a garden gnome leaning slightly to one side. Lily, do you know this house? Lily pointed without hesitation. That's where Uncle Jay lives. The judge leaned forward. The prosecution shifted uncomfortably. Officer Hall's hands clenched the table edge. Claire walked slowly back to the bench. Lily, when was the last time you saw Shadow at that house? Last week, she said. He barked at a cat and made a mess. Uncle Jay said not to tell anybody again. Claire's eyes locked with the judge's for just a second. She was. Done. No further questions, Your Honor. Now it was the prosecution's turn. Ada Lynn Porter approached Lily cautiously. Her voice was even more delicate than Claire's. Hi, Lily. My name's Lynn. Can I ask you just a few questions? Lily nodded politely. Do you know what a police officer is? Yep, Lily replied. And do you know if Shadow is a police dog? Lily paused for a moment. I think so. Uncle Jay says he's a special dog. He gets to go in the police car sometimes. A D.A. Porter's brow furrowed. Has Shadow ever been at your house? Lily shook her head. Has he ever barked at you or made you feel scared? Another shake of the head. No, he's my friend. He gives kisses. Lily giggled. Softly. Ada Porter hesitated. She knew what was happening. She was being outmaneuvered by a toddler who was too honest to manipulate. There was no coaching, no rehearsed lines, no bias. Just memory. Pure, unfiltered, and apparently accurate. Thank you, Lily, she said, retreating to her table, trying to hide the look of growing panic. The judge called another recess. Outside, the courtroom, reporters erupted. The headline practically wrote itself. Toddler connects police dog to officer. Not suspect, more troubling to authorities. The K-9 had been presented as a neutral agent of law enforcement. But now it appeared Shadow may have been used outside of protocol. If the dog had lived at the officer's private residence and interacted regularly with a child connected to the officer, then his arrest report could be biased or worse, fabricated. That meant the entire arrest was now under suspicion. Claire Monroe met with her client, Marcus Lane, in a private room. He sat stunned. I didn't think she'd remember me, he said softly. That little girl, I fixed her mom's car once. Real sweet family. Hall never liked me talking to them. Claire nodded. She just saved your life, Marcus. Meanwhile, investigators began scrambling. Internal Affairs was called in to review Officer Hall's K-9 records. GPS data from Shadow's caller was subpoenaed. Early whispers indicated there were gaps in the location logs the night before the break-in. That meant someone may have tampered with the evidence. And all because a 3-year-old remembered what the adults forgot. Dogs don't lie, but people do. Back inside the courthouse, the judge addressed the room once again. We will pause proceedings until further notice. The court acknowledges that this new testimony has raised substantial concerns regarding the integrity of the arrest and the objectivity of key witnesses. Marcus was escorted out of the courtroom, not in cuffs this time, but with his chin a little higher. As for Lily, she left holding her mother's hand asking if they could get ice cream now. She had no idea that her innocent words had just tipped the balance of justice and changed the course of a trial everyone thought was already won. For most people in the courtroom that day, the image of a 3-year-old pointing her tiny finger at a uniformed officer would remain etched in memory forever. It wasn't just the shock of the accusation. It was the clarity in her voice. No hesitation, no confusion. Just a child stating what she saw, the truth as she knew it. The defense team had expected some raised eyebrows, but the sheer silence that followed Lily's words was chilling. And now, less than 24 hours later, courtroom. Doors reopened with an atmosphere tenser than a murder trial. Something had shifted. The prosecution looked shaken. The judge more serious. Officer Hall wasn't in uniform anymore. He arrived wearing plain clothes, escorted by 2 internal affairs investigators. A quiet but obvious sign of change. Even. Shadow, the police dog once hailed as a hero in this case, didn't enter with the same ceremony. He was led in cautiously, without his police vest, no badge, no fanfare. Just a leash, a low wag of the tail, and the same calm demeanor. But the room no longer saw him as a noble working dog. Now, he was a character in a mystery, one that might hold answers to questions nobody had thought to ask. As the trial resumed. The defense wasted no time. Your Honor, Claire Monroe said confidently, standing at her bench, with the court's permission, we request to bring Shadow into proximity with the child witness once more, under safe and supervised conditions. Judge hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. Bailiff, allow controlled interaction. Lily entered once again, this time with less nervousness. She wore the same pink sneakers and held the same worn-out bunny. But her demeanor was different now, curious, alert. She looked across the courtroom, not at the lawyers or cameras, but at Shadow. The dog's ears perked. The room held its breath. Shadow's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. He trotted toward the girl, breaking protocol, slipping slightly from the officer's control. Shadow? Lily called out excitedly. He bounded to her side. The entire courtroom gasped. She bent down and hugged him without hesitation. He licked her cheek and laid his head in her lap. See? I told you, Lily said with a smile. He remembers me. That was it. No script. No manipulation. No court games. Just a toddler and a dog who clearly recognized her. And suddenly, everything changed. Even those who had doubted Lily's earlier statement now stared in disbelief. This wasn't just coincidence. It was personal. This dog didn't just know her. He loved her, trusted her, obeyed her. The prosecution objected, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge ordered a 30-minute recess. Behind closed doors, conversations turned urgent. Internal Affairs had already begun reviewing Officer Hall's records. The deeper they looked, the murkier things became. For starters, Shadow's off-duty logs had multiple unreported gaps. K-9. Officers are required to submit detailed logs of the dog's whereabouts after hours. Officer Hall's were vague at best. Several nights, including the night of the alleged break-in, were marked as routine home rest. But GPS collar data pulled from Shadow's embedded tracker told a different story. At 8:12 p.m. to 5 hours before the 911 call, Shadow had visited the exact neighborhood of the break-in. Not on patrol, not on assignment, just present. Officer Hall had offered no explanation for this when questioned during an earlier deposition. But now, Lily's testimony and Shadow's behavior put that discrepancy in the spotlight. More alarming was what they found next. Shadow had been seen off-leash in a neighbor's Ring camera footage 2 nights before the arrest. That footage, quietly turned in to investigators by an anonymous source, showed Hall pacing near the Mercer home while Shadow roamed freely. No emergency. No pursuit. No lights. Just Hall, pacing nervously, looking up at the house from the sidewalk. That footage had not been submitted with any prior report. Back in the courtroom, Claire Monroe returned to her questioning. "Officer Hall," she began, calling him to the stand. "Did you ever bring Shadow to visit private homes while off duty?" Hall hesitated. "Sometimes, yes. For community outreach." "Did you ever bring him to your own residence?" "Yes." "Did Lily Daniels ever visit your residence?" He paused longer this time. "I don't recall." "Isn't it true she is the niece of a woman you once dated, Miss Clara Daniels?" A longer pause. "Yes." "And after that relationship ended, did you have any personal conflicts with Marcus Lane?" "Objection," the prosecution interrupted, but the judge allowed it. Hall stiffened. "We had a disagreement once." Claire stepped forward. "A disagreement that led to physical altercations?" Hall didn't answer. Claire continued. "Mr. Lane dated Miss Daniels shortly after your breakup. Isn't that right?" Hall finally answered through clenched teeth. "Yes." The courtroom was quiet again. Claire turned toward the jury. "So let's connect the dots. The accused dated the same woman as the arresting officer. The officers. Dog is recognized by the woman's niece. The dog behaves more like a pet than a police animal. The arrest timeline is inconsistent. And now we have a child, with no stake in this outcome, pointing out the dog, recognizing the man, and identifying a personal relationship that was hidden from the official record." The weight of her words settled like bricks on the courtroom. It wasn't just doubt anymore. It was motive. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking over his glasses. "We will pause proceedings. The court orders a full investigation into K9. Handler conduct, possible conflict of interest, and tampering of arrest records." Officer Hall was let out, not by choice this time. Marcus Lane looked across the room at Lily, still seated quietly with her bunny, now giving Shadow gentle pets as if none of the courtroom drama mattered. She had no idea what she had just done. She hadn't just testified. She had cracked the case, not with legalese, not with evidence bags or fingerprints. With memory, honesty, and the unwavering trust of a dog. The courtroom had never felt quieter. It was the kind of silence that hangs in the air like smoke after a fire, thick, still, and charged with tension. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. Officer Jason Hall was gone now, escorted out of the courtroom by internal affairs. Not under arrest, not yet, but close. The weight of suspicion clung to his shoulders like wet cement. And Lily Daniels? She sat at the center of it all, blissfully unaware that her soft voice and innocent observations had just dismantled the entire prosecution's narrative. The adults had shouted, the lawyers had argued, but in the end, it was her whisper that changed everything. Claire Monroe stood near the window of her office that evening, long after the hearing had recessed. She looked down at the sidewalk below, where journalists crowded like vultures, some of them still camped outside the courthouse. Her phone had rung 11 times in the last hour. News stations, legal podcasts, even a national morning show. Everyone wanted to hear from the girl who changed the trial. But Claire didn't care about the headlines. She cared about Marcus Lane. And she knew that this trial wasn't over. Yes, the prosecution was now wounded. Their star witness was compromised, their timeline unraveling. But there was still evidence to contend with grainy surveillance footage of a man who resembled Marcus, running from the crime scene. A broken window. A report of stolen medication from the house. Claire had poked holes in the story. Yes, but to win? She needed to rip it wide open. So that night, she went back to the beginning. Sitting at her desk, she pulled up the security footage again. The grainy black and white clip that had been played for the jury on day one. A figure in a hoodie, mid-sized frame, ducking behind a hedge before sprinting off into the darkness. Claire replayed it again and again until she noticed something. It wasn't what the figure was doing. It was what he wasn't doing. He wasn't limping. Marcus Lane had a noticeable limp, old high school football injury, surgically repaired twice, still visible in his gait today. Everyone who knew him said the same. You can spot Marcus by the way he walks. And yet the man in the footage? He ran like a sprinter. No hesitation, no hitch, no drag of the left foot. Claire's heart thudded. Why hadn't she caught this earlier? She picked up her phone and called her investigator. Eli, it's Claire. I need you to pull hospital records. Look for anything connecting Officer Hall, or anyone in his immediate circle, to an injury in the past year. Sprain, fracture, anything. Also, find out if he has a brother. She hung up and turned to the second task. The arrest report. Claire read through it slowly. Again. Every line, every timestamp. Officer Hall claimed he saw Marcus fleeing the scene, gave chase, and called for backup. Shadow, the K-9, allegedly cornered Marcus in a nearby alleyway. But there was one detail that now stood out, like blood on a white shirt. Hall never mentioned calling the dog's name. In K-9 procedures, handlers are required to use specific commands, verbal cues, and call-outs to control the dog. But Hall had claimed that Shadow instinctively pursued the suspect. Claire leaned back, thinking hard. What if Shadow didn't pursue Marcus? What if he recognized the real suspect and was ordered to stay silent? The more she thought about it, the more one question echoed in her mind. What if Marcus Lane was never supposed to be the target, just the scapegoat? That night, Claire barely slept. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. The judge entered, somber. The jurors looked weary but attentive. The air felt thinner somehow, anticipation crackling like static. The prosecution, now clearly on the defensive, asked for a delay. Internal Affairs had requested access to Officer Hall's home, and the evidence there was being reviewed. Claire stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to request an immediate suppression hearing regarding the surveillance footage used to identify my client. The judge blinked. On what grounds? Claire's voice was calm, but steely. New forensic analysis reveals that the suspect in the footage does not share a key physical trait with the defendant, namely, his limp. Furthermore, the timestamp does not match the known time Officer Hall made his call for backup. There is now reason to believe the footage may have been strategically edited or misrepresented. Gasps. Again, the prosecution stood, caught off guard. We have not received this analysis, Your Honor. You will shortly, Claire said, holding up a sealed manila envelope. The judge called for a private chamber review. Meanwhile, back in the gallery, Lily sat beside her mother again, doodling quietly with crayons. Shadow, the K-9, sat at her feet, now officially removed from active duty pending investigation. It was a surreal image. A child, a dog, and a courtroom crumbling under the weight of secrets that only innocence could reveal. In the judge's chambers, Claire laid out the case. She presented a side-by-side comparison of Marcus's limp versus the figure in the video. She provided the timestamp discrepancies, GPS inconsistencies, and behavioral evaluations from a K-9 expert who claimed Shadow showed familiarity behavior, not pursuit behavior, during the arrest. The judge said nothing for a long moment. Then he removed his glasses. We may be dealing with an intentional framing, he said softly. Claire nodded once. That's my belief, Your Honor. When the judge returned to the courtroom, his face was unreadable, but his words were not. This court is hereby ordering the suppression of the surveillance video previously submitted as evidence. Furthermore, we are suspending the trial for 72 hours, pending further investigation into potential misconduct by the arresting officer. Another explosion of murmurs. Marcus Lane exhaled, shoulders sagging. Lily looked up, puzzled by the sudden noise. Claire glanced at the girl and smiled. They were winning, but she knew better than to celebrate too early, because secrets were still buried, and some of the most dangerous ones hadn't been revealed yet. The courtroom sat in uneasy suspension, like a clock ticking between thunderclaps. With the surveillance footage thrown out and Officer Hall now officially under investigation, the case against Marcus Lane teetered on collapse. But Claire Monroe wasn't satisfied with a hung jury or a mistrial. She wanted vindication, the kind of truth that couldn't be doubted, spun, or buried under procedure. And she had one more lead-shadow, more specifically, Shadow's caller, earlier that week. When Internal Affairs temporarily took the dog into custody, Claire had filed an unusual motion, the right to examine the canine's equipment, including his tactical vest, leash, and GPS-enabled collar. The request had raised eyebrows, but the judge allowed it. "If the dog's memory is the most reliable in this courtroom," he said dryly, "we'd better check his logs." That's how she found the missing piece. Shadow's collar had recorded a hidden trail, a breadcrumb trail, of coordinates from the night of the arrest. It painted a damning picture. Between 8:06 p.m. and 9:42 p.m., Shadow was nowhere near the location Officer Hall claimed he found Marcus. Instead, he had visited an abandoned cabin nearly 2 miles from the crime scene. Claire's investigator, Eli, traced the address. It had been owned by a now deceased relative of Hall's. No utilities, no surveillance. But it had recently been broken into. The local ranger filed a vandalism report a week earlier, noting paw prints and shredded furniture inside. Claire didn't believe in coincidences anymore. She sent a forensic team immediately. What they found inside the cabin made her blood run cold. In a corner of the darkened room, behind old hunting gear and a moth-eaten cot, they discovered a box lined with cloth. Inside, folded neatly, were several items: a navy hoodie, black ski mask, a pair of gloves, a police-issued dog treat pouch, and, worst of all, a used evidence bag with a torn label addressed to the Mercer family's case. The very house Marcus was accused of robbing. Claire stared at the items, her hands trembling. The truth was no longer a theory. It was physical. It was undeniable. Officer Hall, or someone working with him, had planted evidence. She returned to court the next morning with a fire in her veins. The media had caught wind of the turn. Cameras swarmed the courthouse steps. Reporters screamed questions like seagulls in a storm. But Claire had only one thing to say: truth has a longer leash than lies, and it always finds its way home. Inside the courtroom, the mood was electric. Judge had reconvened early at Claire's request. The jury, while technically not deliberating, was still seated, and every one of them was hanging on her every word. "Your Honor," Claire began, "I present into evidence a GPS data log from the K9 unit's collar on the night in question, alongside forensic photographs from an off-grid location tied to Officer Hall's extended family." She moved methodically, like a chess master arranging the final checkmate. "These photos, entered under seal and reviewed by certified crime scene technicians, show planted material, including a garment matching the surveillance footage. But here's what matters more. The dog's collar confirmed Shadow visited this location just hours before Marcus Lane's arrest." She turned to the jury, her voice sharpening. "Ladies and gentlemen, that dog never chased my client. He was led away to dispose of evidence. And my client? He wasn't a suspect. He was a target." The prosecution objected, but the damage was already done. Their voice carried no weight. Now. The judge leaned forward. "Are we in possession of a chain of custody record for the evidence bag found at the off-site cabin?" "No, Your Honor," Claire replied. It was never officially logged in the Mercer case. Someone tried to erase it. That someone she didn't need to name. The judge rubbed his temples. Then he said something that caused everyone, even Claire, to stop breathing. "I'm issuing an emergency bench order," he said firmly. "As of this moment, all charges against Marcus Lane are hereby dropped." There was a pause, then a wave of gasps, muffled cheers, and even a quiet sob from Marcus's mother, seated in the front row. Marcus himself blinked, stunned, free. Finally, undeniably free. Claire gripped his shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. "You're going home." But it wasn't quite over. As the courtroom emptied, a new team of officers entered, this time not to arrest Marcus, but to take Officer Hall into custody. He was found that morning in a motel off Route 7, attempting to leave town. In his duffel bag, unregistered burner phones, a second key to the cabin, and nearly $9,000 in cash. He didn't speak a word when cuffed, but his silence said plenty. Later that evening, Claire visited Lily Daniels and her mother at their home. She brought flowers, a new stuffed bunny, and at Lily's request, Shadow, now unofficially retired from the force and awaiting reassignment. He bounded through the yard like he'd been here 1,000 times. "Can he stay?" Lily asked. Quietly hugging the dog's neck, Claire smiled. "That's not my call, but something tells me he's already made his decision." Shadow laid beside her in the grass, tail thumping, eyes bright. A guardian returned to the one person who never doubted him. And in that moment, Claire realized something. This case hadn't been cracked by legal brilliance or clever cross-examinations. It had been solved by trust, the trust between a little girl and a loyal dog. Trust that exposed a lie, untangled a scheme, and reminded a courtroom full of cynics that sometimes the smallest voice is the one that brings the truth to light. 3 days after the courtroom erupted in applause and Marcus Lane walked free, the world felt different. Not just for Marcus, but for everyone whose life had been touched by the trial. Outside the courthouse, the city buzzed with headlines. Toddler uncovers police conspiracy. Hero K9 breaks silence. In a case, Marcus Lane, from accused felon to symbol of justice. Every channel played footage of Marcus being exonerated. Lily's voice, sweet and certain, had gone viral across the country. Talk shows debated it. Celebrities tweeted it. And Shadow, the once unknown police dog, had become a national icon. But for Marcus, the fame felt hollow. He sat quietly on the steps outside his mother's house in South Brookside, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring into the sky. Cameras had followed him since his release, but this morning, for the first time, it was quiet. The sun rose slowly, warming his skin, reminding him he was no longer behind bars. But freedom, he learned, wasn't the same as peace. Claire Monroe pulled up in her dark sedan and stepped out, a folder in hand and exhaustion written across her face. She joined him on the steps. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," she replied. "And neither have you." He gave her a faint smile. You'd think freedom would feel lighter. Claire didn't answer right away. Then she opened the folder and placed a document in his hand. "What's this?" he asked. "The full report from Internal Affairs," she said. "It's not public yet." Marcus unfolded the papers and read silently. As his eyes moved down the page, his hands began to tremble. It wasn't just Hall. There had been 2 other officers involved. One of them had logged evidence under false names. The other had been caught communicating via encrypted apps with Hall, discussing the problem with Marcus weeks before the alleged robbery. And worse, a sealed section suggested this wasn't the first time Officer Hall had manipulated. K9 report to close a case. "They framed someone else before me," Marcus said, voice cracking. Claire nodded. "A man named Devin Grant, arrested in 2020, same precinct. Same dog. Was he guilty? Claire looked away. No, he died in prison 2 years ago. Marcus closed the folder slowly. Suddenly, his own exoneration didn't feel like a victory anymore. It felt like a debt. He turned to Claire. We need to reopen that case. Claire raised an eyebrow. I thought you'd want to rest, to disappear for a while. Marcus shook his head. I can't, not now. If Lily hadn't remembered that dog, I'd still be in prison. Or worse. If Devin Grant didn't get that chance, I'll be damned if I don't give it to someone else. Claire stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the polished, courtroom smile, but a real one. You really are something, Marcus Lane. He looked at her, eyes fierce now. No, I'm just free. That means I've got work to do. Back in the city, Claire arranged a press conference. She didn't want to. She hated cameras and buzzwords, but Marcus insisted. He wanted to. Use the moment while the world was still watching. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse once more. Claire stood at the podium. Marcus stepped up beside her, freshly shaved, wearing a borrowed suit, Shadow sitting loyally at his side. Marcus cleared his throat and spoke. I want to thank the court, my attorney, and every person who stood with me when things looked darkest. I'm grateful for my freedom. But that's not why I'm here. He held up a photo of Devin Grant. This man wasn't as lucky as me. He didn't have a courtroom full of cameras or a toddler who remembered a dog. He was just another black man accused by a system that saw his skin before it saw the truth. And now he's gone. But we're not done. Marcus took a breath. We're reopening Devin Grant's case. And any other case connected to the officers involved in mine. Because justice isn't about lucky breaks. It's about accountability. Reporters erupted with questions. Flashbulbs popped. Claire whispered beside him. You're about to become a very loud name. Marcus shrugged. So let's make noise. That same week, the department announced that all K-9 logs and arrest records from the past 5 years would undergo an independent audit. The mayor called it a watershed moment in justice reform. Shadow was formally retired and awarded a service medal, then adopted permanently by Lily Daniels and her mother. Lily, unaware of the legacy she had left behind, spent her afternoons in the backyard with Shadow, braiding ribbons in his fur and reading stories out loud. When a reporter asked her what she remembered about that courtroom moment, she just shrugged and said, I saw my friend, so I said hi. Sometimes it really is that simple. But beneath the headlines, beneath the applause and outrage, Claire Monroe worked overtime. She dove into dusty case files and old arrest logs, chasing ghosts. And Marcus? He began writing letters, dozens of them, to the families of men and women who had been wrongfully imprisoned under Officer Hall's watch. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be a bridge. And slowly, something shifted. Not just in South Brookside, but beyond. Activists, journalists, and lawmakers picked up the trail Marcus had started. Petitions gained traction. A documentary team arrived. And the case of the toddler and the police dog became more than a headline. It became a spark. But even as change bloomed, darkness lingered. Because in the shadows of the courthouse, and within sealed documents still unread, there were whispers. Whispers that Officer Hall had not acted alone, that someone higher up had protected him, that some truths were still buried, waiting to rise. And as Marcus stood at Lily's front yard one evening, watching her play with Shadow, he felt something deep in his chest. Hope. An unfinished business. The glow of the street lamp cast long shadows across the parking lot behind the courthouse, where Marcus Lane waited silently. His breath came in slow, steady puffs, the chill of the night air biting at his skin. Shadow sat loyally by his side, ears alert, nose twitching as if sensing the tension in the air. Claire Monroe pulled up in her car, the headlights piercing the darkness. She stepped out quickly, clutching a folder bulging with files and notes. "We don't have much time," Claire whispered, glancing around. "I just got a call. Internal Affairs has uncovered some new evidence, but it's sealed for now. They want us to hold tight." Marcus nodded. "Feels like every time we think we're close, someone pulls the rug out." Claire sighed. "It's not just Hall anymore. The higher-ups are involved. Someone with power, someone who can bury evidence and intimidate witnesses." Marcus tightened his grip on Shadow's leash. "You think this goes all the way to the top of the precinct?" Claire didn't hesitate. "More than that. We're talking city officials. People who've been protecting a network of corruption for years." Marcus felt the weight settle over him like a storm cloud. The kind of betrayal that didn't just break trust, but shattered it entirely. "How do we fight that?" "We gather proof. Names, dates, transactions, anything that ties them to Hall's dirty work. And we go public when the time is right." Over the next several days, Claire and Marcus plunged headfirst into the investigation. They met with former officers willing to speak anonymously, whistleblowers hiding in plain sight, and families of others who had suffered under the same system. Each interview peeled back more layers of the rot. Inside the police department, falsified reports, bribery, intimidation tactics against suspects and witnesses alike. Hall had been a cog in a vast machine, a machine designed to protect the powerful and punish the vulnerable. One afternoon, Claire received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. "The meeting's tomorrow night. Warehouse by the docks. Midnight. Come alone. Bring the proof." They both knew it was a trap, but they also knew it was the only way to uncover the final pieces. At midnight, Claire and Marcus arrived at the abandoned warehouse, the scent of salt water heavy in the air. Shadows danced along rusted beams and shattered windows. Inside, voices murmured, footsteps echoed. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, imposing, face obscured by a hood. "You have questions," the stranger said, voice low and steady. "Yes," Claire replied, steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Who's protecting Officer Hall?" The figure paused, then threw a folder onto a crate. "Everything you want is inside, but be careful. They don't want this to see the light." Marcus stepped forward. "Why help us?" The stranger pulled back the hood, revealing a weary face, eyes hardened by years of disillusionment. "Because I'm done with the lies. Because my conscience won't let me stay silent. Because if we don't stop this now, more lives will be destroyed." Claire picked up the folder and flipped through its contents. Inside were documents detailing kickbacks, off-the-books accounts, and coded messages linking a city councilman, a high-ranking police chief, and Officer Hall. As the reality sank in, they heard footsteps approaching rapidly. "Time's up," the stranger hissed. "Go!" Claire grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward the exit. Shadow barked sharply, sensing danger. They burst into the night, sprinting toward the car as voices chased them through the alley. Marcus's heart hammered. This was no longer just about clearing his name. It was a war for the soul of the city, safely. Inside the car, Claire locked the doors, breathless. "We've got what we need," she said. "Now it's about how we use it." Marcus stared out the windshield, city lights flickering like a promise and a threat. For the first time, he said quietly, "I feel like we might actually win." The morning sun broke over the city skyline, casting golden light on streets still humming with the aftermath of the trial. But for Marcus Lane and Claire Monroe, the real battle was just beginning. Inside a quiet conference room, reporters, activists, and legal experts gathered, waiting. The folder from the mysterious informant rested on the table, a weight of evidence ready to shatter the carefully built walls of corruption. Claire adjusted the microphone, her fingers steady despite the storm of nerves inside. Marcus stood beside. Her eyes focused, jaw set. Shadow lay quietly at their feet, a silent guardian, a living symbol of truth. The press conference was more than a formality. It was a declaration. A call for justice. Claire began, her voice calm but resolute. Today, we reveal a network of corruption that poisoned not only Marcus Lane's case, but countless others. This evidence implicates high-ranking officials, officers, and city leaders who conspired to protect their own at the expense of innocent lives. Gasps rippled through the crowd as documents, photographs, and recordings were displayed. Marcus stepped forward, his voice rising with passion. I was nearly destroyed by lies and deceit. But thanks to a little girl's memory and a dog's loyalty, the truth came out. Now it's time to hold those responsible accountable. In the days that followed, the city erupted. Protests called for resignations and reforms. The mayor promised a full investigation. Internal Affairs expanded its probe, arresting the councilman, the police chief, and several officers. Marcus returned to South Brookside, greeted by neighbors and supporters who had followed his journey. He wasn't just a free man now. He was a beacon of hope. Lily Daniels ran up to him one afternoon, Shadow bounding alongside. You did it, she said simply. Marcus smiled, ruffling her hair. We did it. But the scars remained. The long nights behind bars, the fear, the injustice. Yet as Marcus looked at Shadow and Lily, he felt a new beginning. Claire, standing nearby, watched quietly. Justice, she knew, was never simple or clean. But today, it was real. The courtroom gasps had turned to cheers, and the story of a toddler's truth and a dog's loyalty had changed everything.